Philia means daughter. We are the daughters of the women who came before us, and we fight so that our daughters may be free. We are a women-led volunteer organization. Our vision is a world free from patriarchy, where all women and girls are liberated. We seek to contribute to the women's liberation movement by building sisterhood and solidarity among women, locally, nationally, and globally. By amplifying the voices of women, particularly those less often heard or purposefully silenced, and by defending women's human rights.
Hello, dear visitors. Thank you for coming to the second part of the Philia webinar, Sex Trade Survivors Demanding the Global Change. I am Luba Fine from Philia. 13 exited survivors from 12 different countries are participating in this webinar. In the first part, we listened to 6 speakers. In this part, we will host 7 speakers. Valerie Pelletier and Caroline Pugh Roberts from Canada, Graciela Colantes from Argentina, Huschke from Germany, Merle Asbogaard from Sweden, Esther from the UK, and Alice Johnson from the US. An inspiring survivor activist from the UK, Rebecca Mott, told, "We call ourselves survivors because not everyone makes it out." And this is so true. Every survivor who leads some sort of normal life is a hero. But our speakers didn't merely survive. They became highly informed opinion leaders and political or social activists. There are a select few who had devoted their lives to the battle against the vile sex industry. In this webinar, each speaker will outline the current state of legislation, data, and statistics in her own respective country. Let me introduce our first speaker now. This is Esther from London. Esther has a long-standing interest in research on criminal and civil justice systems. In her opinion, those systems file women subjected to domestic and sexual violence. After exiting prostitution, she became an activist and a clear, powerful voice against the sex trade. Esther's activism was motivated by what happened and continued to happen to women she met who were still involved in it. Esther is also a real intellectual and contributed her brilliant analysis to the websites Nordic Model Now and Philia. I envy those who are going to listen to Esther for the first time today. So thank you so much for coming here, and let's listen to you.
This piece of doggerel verse underneath here is something that was passed on to me by a relative who picked it up in service during World War II, when he, and particularly felt it sharply when he returned to the piece and discovered that the same social class ran everything. This is a graph of the annual UK household expenditure on prostitution between 1997 and 2020. It's from the Office for National Statistics, published in June. It shows the, in fact, very high number of amount of money estimated. These were estimates which were done by the Office for National Statistics to try and add to the picture of economic activity in the UK. And you can also see the drop 2019 to 2020. So since 2014, ONS has included these estimated figures on drugs and prostitution, reflecting a broader picture of economic activity in the UK. And Dr. Belinda Brooks-Gordon, who was the principal investigator who was responsible for developing this way of looking at it and analysing the spending, said in 2016 The total number of sex workers in the UK is estimated to 72,800, comprising of approximately 32,000 in London and 41,000 outside. Their total gross annual income earned from sex work is estimated to be 5.09 billion, leading to a net income after costs of 1.23 billion. This was put out in evidence to the Home Affairs Select Committee for its report on prostitution, and is clearly meant to emphasize to the committee members what a lot of money is in total. But if you look at that, there are obviously a lot of assumptions made in how they worked out these figures, because it was extrapolated from a large number of women in London, and there are a lot of geographical variations. But that meaning that that's 24.2% net income for that gross figure. And the Office for National Statistics estimated that prostitute women were seeing an average of 29 clients a week, charging them a mean of £67, rising for 6 years to 78 and then down to 73 in 2016. But that actually means a net income per client of £16 and then up to £19 in 2015 and then £18 in 2016. And this is a kind of example of the way in which people's sort of perception or the presentation of the kind of the money that comes from prostitution and the likely earnings from it are consistently misrepresented. Things like the connection between your involvement in the porn industry or the higher levels of remuneration you get from that is rarely mentioned, even in connection with, for example, a previous incumbent of the White House. And the mean rate also takes no account of which services are included in that. Increasing numbers of women entering the sex trade as a result of austerity or through having been trafficked into the United Kingdom are competing for men wanting to perform acts that they have seen in online porn, possession of which would actually be illegal in the UK, but many of which are, only those acts are not unlawful if they're carried out in real life. And that's resulted in many services which are dangerous, attracting a much lower level of remuneration. And then normalization outside the sex industry is a major factor in the onslaught of harassment and sexual violence to which young women in particular are being subject. I wanted to point out that the Adult Psychiatric Morbidity Survey 2014 found that the only age range in which PTSD was more often diagnosed in men than women was 55 to 64, and that the highest incidence of it was in women aged between 16 and 24. There seems to be very little interest in why that might be the case. So this is a general outline about policy and legislation in England and Wales. So performing sexual services for financial reward and paying for them are legal in England and Wales. But related offences like soliciting, loitering on the streets, keeping brothels, etc., are criminal offences, as are a lot of the offences connected with trafficking and sort of controlling women in prostitution here and around the world. So the joint approach of the Home Office, the Police and the Crown Prosecution Service is to help people involved in prostitution to develop routes out of it with support from other agencies. And the Crown Prosecution Service focuses on the people who recruit others into prostitution by charging offences like causing, inciting or controlling prostitution or trafficking. And that's partly because they attract longer sentences and provide opportunities for asset seizure. And policy and legislation in Scotland and Northern Ireland are now devolved matters for the respective governments. So I'm going to speak a bit about them, particularly about Scotland, but most of what I'm saying is about England and Wales. But the laws in all three of these jurisdictions are broadly similar, except that while performing sexual services for reward is legal in all of them, paying for sex has been a criminal offence in Northern Ireland since 2015 Act, Human Trafficking and Exploitation, Criminal Justice and Support for Victims Act. So these are some of the offences related to prostitution in England and Wales: loitering, curb crawling, and then the other ones which are involving trafficking. And the powers to deal with offenders are kind of are shared between the police and the Crown Prosecution Service in England and Wales. So police officers who arrest people who they think have committed the offences which have lower maximum penalties, which can only be tried in magistrates' courts, which is like loitering and soliciting curb crawling, paying for sexual services, or keeping a brothel, they can report them to the prosecutors at the Crown Prosecution Service, like can refer them up, or they can bring charges themselves. They also have powers to issue notices and then apply to a court for an order which would close premises associated with specified offences for up to 3 months, and that can be extended for a further 3 months, making a total of 6 if the court considers it necessary. And these are important factors in how the police approach their role. The individual police officers, they have discretion about what they consider to be the most appropriate response or action to take. This is about any criminal activity which is either observed by them or reported to them. And the chief constables, who are in charge of the 43 police forces in England and Wales, they have overall operational independence, and they're responsible for the direction and control of the forces. Scotland and Northern Ireland have single police forces. And then we also have elected officials called police and crime commissioners, who are responsible for maintaining efficient and effective forces and delivering local police and crime plans, but they cannot fetter the operational independence of the police force and the chief constable. And then the Home Secretary has ministerial responsibility for policing in England and Wales. And then I was going to talk a bit about policing by consent. These are a series of philosophical principles which were first included in instructions to new police officers in 1829, and they emphasize that power of the police to fulfill their functions and duties depends on public approval of their existence, actions and behavior, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. And the principle that police forces police by consent and the individual police constable's discretion and need to prioritize use of resources means that in practice the police make some choices about enforcing the criminal law, and this is not only the case where prostitution is concerned. The Crown Prosecution Service, they deal with cases which are referred up to them, and also if they're cases which are more serious to begin with, they would be dealing with them. And when they're looking at things, they always look at two things. One is there enough evidence against them for whatever the charge is? And then is it in the public interest for the Crown Prosecution Service to bring the case to court? And they have a code for Crown prosecutors, and where prostitution is concerned, they have specific guidance on the individual offences. So between different police forces, because of this issue of individual discretion and operational independence, there's quite a lot of variety in how policing and prostitution has been dealt with. And the 2014 report showed that the policing and enforcement, unevenly prioritized and resourced as it was, there were only a few exceptions possible, and where extraordinary political leadership had happened at a local level. And they took the view that at worst this could trap women in cycles of abuse and prevent them exiting prostitution. And several of the witnesses who gave evidence to the Home Affairs Committee's inquiry in 2016 particularly mentioned the unfair targeting of enforcement of females involved in prostitution rather than male sex buyers. So these are some initiatives that have been carried out in local UK forces. There's Norfolk and Suffolk in particular, the initiatives that they took around street prostitution and using the curb crawling, and the zero tolerance initiative in the case of Suffolk police, which effectively eliminated street prostitution there. And there are also some in Scotland, and massage parlours, which had been set up and saunas in Edinburgh, there were big raids on them in 2013 by Police Scotland. The police forces in Scotland were consolidated into a single force, and a lot of them were closed down. And an establishment of a managed area for street prostitution in the Holbeck area of Leeds has proved to be ineffective, damaging in predictable ways to the neighbourhood and surrounding areas, and has now ended following public protests and direct action. One of the actual advantages of the fact that we have had different forces doing different things is that you can see when some things have worked and some haven't. It's so precisely because of that, it's a bit like different kind of trialing of policies out. And enforcement of laws on things like soliciting will differ in affluent neighbourhoods, where residents fear the impact on their property values in a country in the UK, as we know, many people's main asset is their home. And a combination of that and that affects quite a lot of things about how things work. And sometimes when I see other police forces reporting about, oh, we don't understand how different systems work in the UK. Some of it has to do with voting and things like first past the post, and the fact that on a single issue you might be able to knock somebody out either of a seat, or also that, for example, if this was an issue when the government had a proposal in the Labour government to allow two maids and two prostituted women and a maid to work together without that constituting a brothel, because our definition of brothel, which comes from case law, is more than one woman using the space either at the same time or consecutively. A difficulty with that, which had nothing to do with the criminal law, was that there would have to be a change of use in the planning system, and that would be a public document, and that because people would immediately be concerned that their property values might go down, it's very likely that you'd have some action. And these sort of political things influence quite a lot of what is or isn't possible with some of the things that the people who were demanding these different initiatives, in sort of pro-prostitution initiatives. I don't think they always grasp how things can happen, because if you had looked at what happened in Edinburgh and other places, for example, you might have expected what happened in Holbeck, and because what really you were signaling, if you were saying that a particular area had been selected for that, was that you either felt that there was no possibility of anybody being voted out for doing that, or of any successful direct action, or that you were sort of somehow signaling to other people that that was the case, and then you would also make the area a magnet for a lot of other things, including drug dealers, and it would all have been predictable from what had happened previously. So these are the National Police Chiefs Council's National Policing Sex Work and Prostitution Guidance. This is a document which they have for trying to have a sort of a single focus on through all the different police forces about what they do. And it says, for example, this guidance offers practical advice to those dealing with sex work related issues, recognizes the need to address community concerns, but also stresses as a priority the duty that police services have to enhance the safety of sex workers and find practical ways to address crimes against them. And then also says the presence of organized criminal activity is unquestionable and causes great harm to individuals and communities, and it's their responsibility to robustly investigate it. Well, you notice from that, they're effectively saying that there are situations in which the community concerns would be lesser than what they see as the issue around safety of sex workers. But at the same time, we also know, and something that's really crucial for the Nordic model generally, is what other alternatives there are, and what safety of sex workers to be persuaded to leave has to have to do with a lot of other things. And I find it curious that they see themselves, in spite of the policing by consent thing is the general principle about policing, but in this particular case, they have put the issue that it's worth going against a community in order to put a particular area of a managed area in a particular place. They didn't, for they says lots of things in this document about there's a lot of sort of rhetoric about things like stakeholders and speaking to communities, but they didn't really address the community of demand. And one thing I thought was interesting, when there was a lot of stuff on social media about the residents and people around Holbeck taking photographs of the vehicles, which the police were clearly not doing in connection with curb crawlers, was that that sort of possibly suggesting to the police that it might be a good idea to speak to the community of demand rather than saying communities, when what you actually mean is that you've spoken to various people, some of them self-appointed, in an area which you have decided to have received that, and also the surrounding difficulties it caused. This is an issue about disclosure of criminal records. So I already mentioned that things like housing and other issues around inequality and its austerity and income inequality are really, really fundamental in what and sort of background factors in why a lot of people, both women, become involved in prostitution, and also why it's very difficult to leave. And this slide is about a particular obstruction which is placed on people if they have convictions. And in November 2020, the rules about disclosure of convictions were changed, and this was a result of 3 women who had convictions for loitering and soliciting from more than 20 years ago, being supported by the Centre for Women's Justice. And the rules were changed, but the convictions which are now regarded as protected, they are not immune from disclosure altogether. They will be retained on the police national computer for the woman's lifetime, and a record could still be disclosed within the criminal justice system and for certain other purposes. So the women concerned have made a further challenge about this indefinite retention of their criminal records, because that was opposed by the National Police Chiefs Council and by the Home Office. And the judges recognised that the impact of the retention of records of what is really the records of the abuse of these women could be distressing and degrading for them, and could interfere with their ability to move on. But they still felt that the public interest in maintaining a comprehensive record of convictions far outweighed the personal interests of the claimants. And it's puzzling that the National Police Chiefs Council, which said that in relation to the records, is the same police council which then says that the interests of the safety of sex workers comes even above communities in terms of what they're doing with their overall policies. They have a completely different view, and they're effectively obstructing moving forward of people trying to exit the sex industry, because also, I mean, you couldn't really have a better way of defeating your claimed approach, which is that you support those involved in prostitution to leave, than to claim that it's necessary to maintain their records. And also, the particular offences that are involved there, which are loitering and soliciting, were the police to decide to take action against someone for that today, those offences are not notifiable to the Home Office, and there's no requirement to record them for data purposes on the main system. They're sort of internal data, and yet it is considered necessary for these offences, which this would not happen to now, because they are trying to make the emphasis more on the sort of bigger, the more serious offences. They wouldn't even be recorded, and yet they would be preventing people from moving forward without having this record behind them. Because also the enhanced DBS certificates, which you would need to get for many jobs, including social and healthcare positions, they may also take information of those sorts of records if the police consider it relevant. So again, it's for the police to decide. I find that a big irony, and a lack of, I don't know whether it's that a lot of the things are happening for presentational purposes, because you can't really be sincere in your position and then have that kind of a view. And I mean, there are other cases where the government has held out that the public interest in maintaining a comprehensive record outweighs the personal interest. That was the argument which the UK government brought repeatedly in cases about transgender people wanting to change their birth certificates and ultimately lost. But that is the argument which they are putting again about these particular convictions, that you should never be able to change them in spite of the circumstances in which you acquired them. And the case being brought by those women is likely to go to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. Yeah, this is what the court judgment in which they decided that the public interest favoured that the interest of the women did not matter against the need to have a coherent record. They said that circumstances in which these records could be disclosed were these: there are a small number of defined positions of utmost integrity where details of all convictions and cautions may be taken into account. Some examples: jobs activities relating to national security, the police, judicial appointments, and firearm certificates. Those positions do not receive criminal record information through the DBS, but instead they get them directly from the police national computer. And there's another irony in that for me, because we had a case a few weeks ago in the Court of Protection where a judge decided that it was lawful for people involved in the care of a disabled man to help him to access the services of women in prostitution. So that the person who you could not get to that appointment where you made that decision if you had that type of record at any point in your life. So it's sometimes the people who are making these rulings are very distinct from anybody who ever had that kind of experience. The other unusual thing about the case with about the disability discrimination, apart from that it would be very awkward and difficult for quite some people who are involved in care work in those circumstances, is also that it's actually the organizations who provide those services, they actually discriminate in, if you were playing devil's advocate, they discriminate in restricting the number of services which these people can access. And it's they use the usual kind of euphemistic language without really explaining why that should be the case. Sort of, for example, if you say that that incontinence is unacceptable, well, voluntary incontinence is acceptable. Anyway, I found that quite interesting, that those very roles where you make those sorts of decisions are ones from which that sort of thing would exclude you. So in the UK, indoor prostitution is the largest and least visible part of the sex industry. And young women who are persuaded by those people who sanitize prostitution to become involved with the sex trade, for example, while at university, are more likely to be involved with the indoor prostitution than with the street prostitution, which might give them the criminal record that we mentioned earlier. That's another reason why there's a difficulty with that judgment. But this is indoor prostitution is mainly facilitated online through commercial websites which exist solely or partly to advertise people for this purpose. And this these are the conclusions of a cross-party group of members of the Scottish Parliament who published a report of an inquiry into them. They found that they're a major enabler of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. They knowingly facilitate and profit from the prostitution of others, and that the ones that are the sort of market leaders, they centralize and concentrate demand online from sex buyers. And very notably, that it's not possible to claim that they provide a kind of safety for vetting clients. It's not actually possible to design out opportunities for third parties to traffic and exploit women through them. That they do not enhance women's safety. And also that existing Scottish legislation fails to prevent their operation. And more worryingly, that the scale of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation they facilitate vastly outstrips the policing capacity to respond to it. That is true with a lot of organized crime in general, that the assets that the organizations that run these things have exceed the capacity of the state. But it's rather alarming to find that, and that can result, I think, sometimes in fatalism on the part of who is the law enforcement about how these things work. It also mentions that the current UK-wide law enforcement collaboration with these websites fails to meet its objectives and actually provides political cover, sort of like legitimation, to the companies that run them, and underplays the level of the threat that they pose. And then the international legal and law enforcement initiatives to tackle websites enable evidence-based action within Scotland. And I can't be the only person on here that know the way that, I mean, that was entirely my experience, was accessing clients through a website. And it is certainly my experience with all of those things, that it was absolutely impossible. Your number would be out there and people would contact you directly. And the other thing that used to happen a lot to me, partly because of the sort of whereabouts I was, the sort of work, the kind of services I was doing was I about every kind of month or
I apologize, Esther, there we are running out of time.
Oh, right, sure. Yeah,
I absolutely love the presentation. I don't want to miss anything.
No problem, no problem.
Thank you.
I was good. I've just put these up here because this is the
Sure.
violence against women
This is
and
so
girls
important.
strategy.
Right.
And the Home Office has put this out with the second strand. The first strand is about a public consultation, which only lasted 10 weeks. The second involves focus groups from academics, experts, and those exploring emerging and evolving forms of violence against women through submissions and focus groups. But this part is where the subjects to be covered include prostitution, sex work, commercial exploitation, trafficking, and modern slavery. So this is not the part where they're interested in people's opinions coming in from the general public. It's who these experts are and how they would be selected. That would be quite, I mean, to me, that's a way, as has happened in the past, of certain information being filtered out if it isn't convenient. This is the Scottish government strategy, which said most specifically that they were taking action on all forms of violence against women and girls, and they meant directed at women and girls precisely because they are women and girls, carried out predominantly by men, stemming from systemic, deep-rooted women's inequality, and which includes domestic abuse, commercial sexual exploitation, and other forms of violence. And that's quite an emphatic statement compared with what has come out of the Home Office. And this was a consultation that they did, came out early this year, about proposals on prostitution, removing all penalties and prosecution, greater focus on deterring those who buy sex, adaptations to policy and support for women, addressing how it's been affected by technology, and the underlying and systemic advantages that women and girls experience. So that's a little bit I just wanted to say about, I think, the great quote from John Dewey, the kind of educational philosopher: the way in which a problem is conceived determines what specific suggestions are entertained and which are dismissed, and that many studies about the influence of globalized online sexual violence, you can see them as being conclusion driven, and in the framing of the questions and in the sorts of issues that one is free to discuss in academia. And researchers claiming an interest in investigating the extent of sexism among men in their samples, for example. I find this really quite amusing sometimes. They frequently reveal class bias and a lack of accounting for performative anti-sexism, and the researchers' constraints on being able to match what men in their samples say with what they do in private. And also the perceptions of what a global city is includes access to, the perception that what a global city is includes access to prostitution is sexist by default. You can, once you're in there, you're already in a sexist paradigm. But the example that I find quite amusing is like for asking people, that some men who were at a sex expo in Las Vegas about their attitudes, and then deciding that they were not sexist. And if we would look at things like who is carrying out the domestic and caring responsibilities at home, and or what's the view of the man towards the husband, the wife earning more than him. And you can just imagine the researcher having to make that call. Mrs. X.
Sister, we are 10 minutes over.
Oh, right.
I can listen for you.
No. I just wanted
hours.
to point out that it's really important to look at how these questions are constructed, because they tell you before you even look at the research what the answer is going to be. And that is it really. I just wanted to put this question because I find that with a lot of the things that are asked.
Thank you so much, Esther. And the UK is such a fascinating place. This is a war of daughters of light against the sons of darkness. So strong decriminalization forces and very strong abolitionist forces. Let's see what happens in the next years. Thank you so much for analyzing this. So now our next speaker, Graciela Colantes. She is an Argentinian journalist. As a journalist, she is a member of Red Part, a media network that adheres to the principle of non-sexist communication. Graciela is also a survivor of sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, and prostitution. She was the one who co-founded AMAR, the first association of prostitutes in Argentina. Later, when AMAR took a regulationist approach, Graciela left it and founded the abolitionist NGO, AMAD. AMAD is an association of Argentinian women's rights. It is focused on the rights of both women and trans prostitution survivors. As a president of AMAD, Graciela fights against the entire prostitution system. Graciela Colantes is a specialist in the formulation and monitoring of gender politics. She published her first book, Our Bodies Are Not to Be Regulated, in 2019. Thank you so much for joining us today, Graciela. Let's listen for you.
Hola.
Good morning, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to say thank you for this invitation, and a special thank you to Filia, who is organizing this. And also I would like to express my thank you from Argentina. I'm very honored to be part of it and being able to meet other participants and other survivors from the world.
Agradecerte a mi traductora, así que si no hubiera...
I'm Graciela Colantes, survivor from sex trafficking, and I've been an activist for the last 20 years, fighting for the people in prostitution and against sexual exploitation. And this is a situation that is happening in my country, Argentina.
Más de 20 años que lucho contra esta problemática social de nuestro país y del mundo entero.
Now I'm the president of the Human Rights Argentinian Women Association, created by us, a group of survivors of prostitution and sex trafficking that believe that such violence cannot be considered a job. We created this group when we left the Association of Argentinian Prostitutes. Today, this Association of Argentinian Prostitutes, that they are very controversial, they support the prostitution as work, and they expect the recognition of prostitution of work. They were created, they were very active, and they were giving this idea about prostitution during the 90s. And at that time, there was a great repression for all the women that they were in the prostitution system.
Bueno, después de liberarme del proxeneta, dice, nuestra lucha sirvió para liberarme.
After I could break free from my pimp, I stayed trapped within the prostitution system because of fear, as I was under threats, and I was at that time in charge of my little girl. At that time, there was a mafia around, and they were putting several threats on us. However, after a long time, 16 years actually, I managed to get some relative autonomy that allowed me to talk to other women that were in the same situations. I knew I wanted to leave prostitution, but I did not know how to do it. I believe that the state is also complicit on this situation, not giving us the opportunity to leave when we wanted the system of prostitution.
Por falta de oportunidades. No sabía cómo salir de este sistema, no sabía qué hacer. Organizarnos.
Yes, during this time when we organized ourselves, we started to understand that there was normalized this situation in Argentina, that because also of the machismo existing, that women were like, we had to be submitted to the system. But thanks to the organization, we started to lose this fear and started to report the criminalization that we were suffering because we were tired of so many abuses by the system.
En Argentina,
so getting organized made us aware of what we were confronting, the same issues, that somehow there was the situation in Argentina, the state also, was somehow putting us in the position as women that because of, without having resources, without being supported, then we were trapped somehow in a vicious circle during these years. And we
a
ask
charlar entre
ourselves,
nosotras,
why
sentar y a
women we
debatir
have to
por
be
qué
available for men
nosotras las mujeres
satisfaction?
siempre
What about
dentro del
our
sistema de la
rights? What about
prostitución terminábamos
our
pobres y los
our
proxenetas
condition of
siempre
citizens
y los
in the
cómplices
country?
terminaban muy ricos. Sí, una de las cosas que tuvimos que atravesar en la Argentina, un principio cuando recién nos organizábamos.
So during the 90s, from the Argentinian Unions Association, there was a proposal of becoming a union. They called us and they wanted us to become sexual workers. It was a very difficult and time-consuming internal debate within the union's headquarters. But what we learned is that if prostitution became a job, we would continue all our life within the prostitution system. I was part of the prostitution survivors that took an abolitionist position, and for that reason, we were expelled from both the Association of Argentinian Prostitutes and the Union Association. We didn't want an improvement of brothels. We didn't want these kind of things. What we wanted is to leave the system, the prostitution system, and if the laws had been applied, we would be in other position in our days, because we wanted to be part of a future for women, Argentinian women, that is different of belonging to this system of prostitution that somehow it has been naturalized and accepted within the society.
De las propias sobrevivientes, la lucha y desnaturalizar y demandar estas políticas que quería llevar el Estado argentino, hoy hubiéramos sido una más dentro del sistema. En el 2008,
in 2008, we managed to get the first abolitionist law against sex trafficking, and this law was passed and criminalized prostitution, sexual exploitation, and sex trafficking, not criminalizing prostitutes, but criminalizing the pimps and all the system, the prostitution system, all organizations that they were involved in sex trafficking.
Sí, y esa ley nos permitió.
So with this first law was a tool that gave some support to women to start to report all kinds of abuses. However, I would like to stress that in Argentina, as it is common in the majority of Latin American countries and in general poor countries at global level, this context of pandemic and unemployment are acute. So women, girls, and boys are vulnerable to be deceived and then captured with the objective of exploiting them sexually. It is very important to recognize the situation of the poor countries, because in our case, and this is something that I'm very interested to explain and to put forward to the global context, that the situation of vulnerability that is brought because of poverty and the current situation is putting countries in Latin America in a level of vulnerability that perhaps other countries don't have. And at the moment, most of the people that they are trafficked, they come from poor countries, and it's something that has to be considered. And something that I want to really stress, that the situation of the system of prostitution, the prostitution system, when it is happening in poor countries, it's really, really serious.
A pesar, nuestra organización, a pesar de que viene luchando hace más de 20 años para visibilizar, para posicionarnos claramente y hacernos escuchar, no tan solo en Argentina, solamente también a nivel Latinoamérica.
The gravity of the situation in Argentina, that we are many survivors fighting day by day during many years, demanding the implementation of abolitionist laws. We have very good laws in Argentina, but they have not been implemented. And this should be translating into the prevention, education, work opportunities, housing for all women that survive prostitution, because what are observing that prostitution and sex trafficking are on the increase. And what we've been doing is, as strategies, we've been trying to visibilize the problem in the streets. So we act in the streets, we talk to people, we try to sensibilize the society that should not be accepting prostitution. We also go to organizations, we give talks, we go to universities, etc. But we had a great problem in Argentina, that the lobby that it's the regulationist lobby wanted to create, to convince the society that that prostitution is a job as anything else, and we don't want this. We don't want, and we have to consider, and this is one of the reasons that I'm here, and I'm really asking help to the global abolitionist movement, and through this webinar, that to help us, because Argentina is the first or the most important provider where the lobby proxenate, the lobby, the pimping lobby is working now, and they are capturing people in Argentina because we are vulnerable. It's a vulnerable country, it's a poor country.
Tenemos que decir, tenemos que contarle y tenemos que hacerle saber que hoy el Estado argentino es el primer promovedor del lobby proxeneta. Quieren reglamentar la prostitución. Quieren que la prostitución sea como otro trabajo, como cualquier otro trabajo. Y nosotras llevamos una lucha de hace más de 20 años, no lo vamos a permitir. Y por eso estamos acá también, para que nos escuchen y nos puedan ayudar. Bueno, no sé cuántos minutos me quedan, pero bueno, esto, volver a agradecer. No sé si quedó claro.
Well, I would like to say thank you again to Filia, to the organizer, to all the panelists present. And I want again to stress that we in Argentina, we are fighting really much for an abolitionist objective. And we would like also to stress this situation that as Latin Americans, as not only Latin America, but to say that the poverty of the poor countries make us really the providers of women that they are going to be trafficking into richer countries, that we are really providing, no, like this women, children, to the system, this system that is victimizing so many people. And I welcome very much this initiative, and I would really ask to continue with this globalization, and this has been the first step. And of course, there is much more to talk. There is no time now, but I hope that this is just the first step, and that we are going to continue with this. Thank you again to everybody, and thank you to Filia for this, and
gracias también a Marta por la traducción que me ayudó.
Graciela is thanking me because she says, as she doesn't speak English, she would have been to participate. And Marta would like to apologize for any kind of mistakes that I could have made. And I try my best. Yes? Okay, thank you. Gracias, Graciela.
Thank you so much, Marta and Graciela. It was amazing. And I joined to Graciela. I hope that we will continue this tradition of exchanging knowledge with abolitionists around the world, between abolitionists in general, abolitionist survivors. This could be great collaboration for the future as well. And now I will introduce our next speaker. This is Valerie Pelletier. Valerie Pelletier is a survivor of prostitution and a militant abolitionist radical feminist from Montreal, Quebec. I met Valerie on social media, and as two abolitionists and cat lovers, we immediately connected. Valerie's activism is unbelievably multifaceted. She is a public speaker, a conceptual artist, a vlogger, a singer, everything. She is involved in the NGO CAFES, which stands for Collective to Help Sexually Exploited Women. As a supporter of the Nordic model, which has been implemented in her country since 2014, Valerie frequents social workers in Montreal to educate them. She believes that social workers cannot be neutral when it comes to supporting women in prostitution. In Valerie's opinion, the social workers should support survivors actively and encourage them to leave prostitution while strengthening their self-efficacy and self-confidence. So let's listen now to what Valerie has to share about the Nordic model implementation in her state.
Thank you so much for having me. I think back 20 years ago when I was still in the sex industry, I could have never thought that one day I would be in a position to be speaking like this and giving back. So sorry if I might get emotional. This is so thrilling. So yes, I'm fortunate enough that I live in a country where we do have the correct law and we do have the correct model. Unfortunately, it hasn't been implemented evenly throughout Canada. Some provinces are doing better than others. I'm understanding that Manitoba, because the community agencies have been very proactive at training the police officers and the social workers and everyone involved, Manitoba seems to be enforcing the Nordic model correctly, and to have John schools in order to properly try to re-educate males, at least the ones that are perhaps not ingrained consumer who feel entitled. And for the others, then they'll end up in the criminal system, and that's their problem. So I navigate several levels. I do have the opportunity to go speak in schools and to train people who will intervene with prostituted women. I also have had the chance to go speak to an auditorium full of 400 future police officers. And it was really great to see that it was sad to see how little they knew, but it was great to see that there were some that really understood and were ready to change their lens. What I'm seeing on the ground is, for example, a while ago, we had on one of our survivors forum, we had males that were acknowledging and being proud of saying that they were customers and that it's their right, and it's a woman who's like consenting and so on. And because these males were actually denouncing themselves as clients, we took screen captures, and on behalf of my colleagues, I went to the police and I tried to get them to act on it. I said, look, this guy is actually saying he's a trick and he's saying he's entitled. He was even saying that he would love to be arrested so that he could make it to Supreme Court to try to contest the abolitionist model. What saddened me is that when I got to the police station, the actual police officers that work on the ground did not know the law. And my understanding is that only the investigators and higher level or people who actually work with trafficking understand the law, but your regular police officer that's out on the street giving tickets doesn't really understand. All that they know is that since 2014, they're no longer harassing and arresting prostitutes, but they actually don't get that they're supposed to arrest clients. And what they told me and their understanding is that they're basically only after clients of minors or pimps of minors. Whenever it's an adult woman, they kind of don't care. They're in this basically the liberal feminist idea of it's her choice, blah, blah, blah. Even though we try so hard to explain to them that it's never so much as a choice as a lack of choice. And if today I'm in such a good position where I can share this knowledge, it wouldn't have been the case 20 years ago where I had to endorse sex work as an identity in order to survive within it and to feel empowered, which takes you a lot to unpack, and women need therapy. So I'm going to say a whole bunch of things. So at the social level, there hasn't been any campaign in Canada to educate the public. So most people don't know that it is illegal to purchase sex. And the way I like to say it is that it's actually illegal to bargain someone's sexual consent, whether it's with money or with reduction on your rent bill, or because landlords are a big problem with vulnerable women. So in every layers of society, a woman that has been vulnerable before remains vulnerable, and men kind of have a radar to spot us, to know which women can be made to cave in. And so I'm seeing how, as long as we don't have campaigns like we had many years ago about, for example, drinking and driving, as soon as it started to become unpopular and unsexy in people's minds to be cool and drink and drive, then nowadays no one would let their friend leave with the car if they drank. It's actually okay to grab the keys from them. But when you have a group of workers, say a stereotypical construction worker going to the strip club, or a bunch of guys after a sports game going to a strip club, because the strip clubs in Montreal is where a lot of the prostitution happens now, because it's contact dancing. So you have these males feeling entitled, they're not aware of the law, and there's not one of them in that group who's going to go like, no, actually, guys, that's not okay. So there's a peer pressure and a group thing. And as long as the society isn't wholeheartedly supporting the idea that it is not cool, not okay to purchase women's sexual consent and to enter and violate their bodies. And by the way, I just want to make a parenthesis. I'm so proud of the text that accompanied this conference, the one that starts by, "We, 15 exited sex trade survivors, are gathered here not to mince words." And the whole rest of the text is so radical as in root, because we need to get to root of the problem, and it is male entitlement to women's bodies. Capitalism is a product of patriarchy. So yeah, sure, capitalism is a problem, but unless we change this mindset, this patriarchal mindset, we're not going to get anywhere. So that's one of the big things that we need to be doing, is to educate around us and to make it absolutely uncool. But unless the government gets involved, the problem is that the law in Canada was pushed by the Conservative Party. And often we survivors, even I as an abolitionist anarchist, I have to side with conservatives on this issue, because unfortunately, they're the only ones who haven't drank the Kool-Aid. Because the Liberals and the NDP in Canada totally drank the Kool-Aid of sex workers' work, and they want to push for surrogacy as well. So we're not getting out of this. They're not willing to see that there are some aspects that need to be outside of the reach of the market. We've already done it for blood donation, for organs. You cannot sell an organ. So why does sexual consent and sexual intimacy of women doesn't matter this much? It blows my mind. Now, for women among ourselves, I would say our biggest problem is poverty. It costs me 1 out of every 2 paychecks just to cover rent. So back when I was growing up, home economic school would teach us that you're supposed to allocate a quarter of your income to rent. I'm sorry, that is impossible. And in my case, I've been fortunate enough to hold on to the same apartment for the last 21 years, and I still struggle to make rent, although I have been contesting the yearly raise. So I can't even imagine the apartments at the cost of today's rent. So poverty is a big thing, and it is a way that landlords continue to sexually exploit women. Women among ourselves, all we have is each other. Whenever I'm in trouble or I struggle, or I'm like, oh, I need to get to this appointment, but I don't even have metro money, the people who help me are actually fellow survivors in this group called Cafés, where we support each other in a peer relationship. Now, I want to take a moment to explain something I found that I really think is a good place to put your energy as an activist. So in Canada, we do have the correct law at the federal level, but when it trickles down to provincial and municipal, that's when you start seeing the problem. Because, for example, at the municipal level, I'm going to speak about Montreal, which is where I live, which, if you don't know, is a rampant sex industry. I live in the same neighborhood where I was prostituted 20 years ago. And if I walk out of my house in a 100-meter radius, I have a cheap hotel that rents by the hour. I have masseuse parlor, and there's strip clubs all over around me. Like, it's impossible to walk on St. Catherine without finding a strip club every 3 blocks. So how do these businesses that structure the resale of other human beings get these permits? Well, they get it from the municipal level. And I went to confront the city during a city audience, and I asked the question, there are 2 different types of permits. how do these erotic massage parlors get this license? Well, the city replies, we give out license to massage parlor, and it is not our duty to verify whether they do sexual or legitimate health services. It's up to the citizens. That's what they told me. I swear, the mayoress of Montreal replied that to me. There's a video on my YouTube channel in French about this very event. And she tells me, well, if citizens are concerned, they can denounce to the police and the police will inquire. Okay, but there's not actually no mechanism to verify before they hand out these licenses or throughout the time that they operate. That's appalling to me. The other permit that is highly problematic is that in Montreal, at the municipal level, there's a type of zoning called the Erotic Zoning. And this, it covers all the strip clubs. Basically, they're very happy. The city's proud to say, oh, but it's like you can't get a new permit. It's only the people who have had their permits for, I don't know, I think it's over 20, 25 years that it's been regulated that you can no longer open new strip club. But there's so many. And sometimes they close one and they reopen under a different name, but it's the same permit but owned by the same person. So how come this very erotic zoning continues to exist when it actually doesn't make sense with the federal law that prohibits pimping? Because that is what those businesses are doing. And if you went into labor law and you tried to apply them to the sex industry, it's just blunt how impossible it is to do. Because when you work in a strip club, no labor law applies. There is no protection for you. You actually pay to work. And it's full-on prostitution, because since 2001, on average in Montreal, all the strip clubs started to go from just stripping to contact dancing. So the moment they went to contact dancing, that's when you had these booths where you walk in with the client, you close a curtain or a door. What do you think happens behind those doors? It is actually prostitution. There's no other way to call it. And this exists, and it keeps existing. So I have another idea I want to share, and you can get in touch with me at legaltendermontreal@gmail.com if you're interested. What I want to do is to do a global campaign, because we need to be super coherent and globalistic about this, because we know that if prostitution is abolished in a country, it just moves in another country, because prostitution is by definition racist. I'm sorry if I speak so fast. I wish I had an hour with you guys. So my idea is this. We should do, you know, what they do in France, the collage, where they go out and they do an action out in the street. Well, why don't we set on a night where all of us around the world go with the logo that we decide? I've actually designed one, if you're interested. And we go and we put this logo, we tag it on the floor in front of every sex venue in our cities. And we need to do something this global so that there's a press kit sent out to say why we are doing this. And if this very same logo pops up in France, in Israel, in Australia, this is a message. We need to show how normal we are. We are normal. We have the correct lens. We have the correct moral barometer. I'm so tired of being gaslit, of being told by these people who ignore an entire body of knowledge from psychotraumatology. We know so much about, first off, who ends up in prostitution and what consequences it leaves the women with. These are facts. These are understood very well. So it's enough. Like, I can't stand this head in the sand of like, no, it's a choice like any other. No, I am done. We need to be active. We need to show that not only we're normal, but we're joyful, we're excited about a better world, and we believe that males can do better. Because it's such a cynical position to just say, oh, it's always existed, and, you know, it's a man's need, and so on. So actively debunk the myths everywhere you find them. Say something about it. Send links to friends. If you can't debunk it right now in the spot during the conversation, later send them a link from Philia, because there's so many great articles. And I'm so happy that Philia has the moral courage to be this radical and to have such great panelists and all the podcasts that you can go and listen to. Philia is extremely coherent in its positions, and this is what we need. We need to be a solid block that says no. And I'm just so happy I can contribute. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie. This is exactly what I want for us to be global, to be connected, abolitionists from all around the world. This is a great idea. No systematic knowledge creation together.
Absolutely.
And I will turn to I will introduce our next speaker. This is Merle Asbogaard from Sweden. 2 years ago, I met her in Bradford at the annual Philia conference. We both spoke at the same abolitionist panel. I was shocked to learn that this brilliant, beautiful woman has spent 16 years in prostitution. Eventually, she exited and turned into an activist. Today, Merle is a political scientist, activist for the Nordic model, and a board member of a local Me Too initiative. Merle Asbogaard's autobiography will be published soon. I really hope it will be available in English. I can see how it becomes one of my absolutely favorite books. Please, Merle, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy. And I just want to say, yes, yes, yes. I'm listening to all your panelists and I'm on fire right now. It's been hard times for me, as you know, but I felt I grew as a person just listening to all these wonderful women. I would like to read a speech that I've written, but not memorized. So I'm going to read from a paper. I'm going to talk initially about a question that I'm being continuously asked by reporters and also students from different level. Which was worse, racism or sexism? The question is again asked as many times before. The question is important, that is the answer that is difficult. What on my body trumps the oppression over another part of the body? Is it the melanin in my skin or the fact that I was once a girl and later a woman? Two destructive structures that both reap lives and dreams. Sorry. That both reap lives and dreams. My answer, based on my extensive experience, have the potential to have actual consequences in the view of vulnerability. The weight of the question does not do itself justice in relation to the rather simple design, which was worse, racism or sexism. I came into child prostitution because I was a girl. I was brutalized because I was Black, could be the answer, even if it does not give a clear idea of the truth, as the truth itself runs deeper than that. To be Black, to be a woman, is to be in constant struggle for the right to one's body, one's right to autonomy, sexuality, individuality, and self-determination. The right to a place in the public space and the right to gain access to the place in the public without having to give up the right to any of the above. What makes me a woman does not make me Black, and what makes me Black does not make me a woman. But when they meet, we see a historical oppression that lives well in our days. An expression that got its own name, coined by a Black woman named Moya Bailey, Mr. Unar. It is a summary word to describe the hatred, prejudice, mistrust, disapproval, violence, discrimination, silence, and culture of silence that afflict Black girls and women. Something I myself had to realize when during my almost 40 years in earthly life, I've come in contact with or met only one single other Black woman in Sweden who's reported a sexual assault. Victims' actions, meaning reporting the rapes to the police, damage the fight against racism, they were told, within our own community. A study done at Georgetown University established what I think most Black people already are well aware of. Black girls are seen as less innocent, sexualized, and adulticide, seen as adults with an adult's responsibility, more so than white girls. Black girls' attitude, which can be read and understood as emotional reactions, was also more often interpreted as cheeky and aggressive, and at an earlier age. In an article from the Washington Post, Jonita Davis testifies about how Black girls are sexualized from the moment they learn to walk and talk. Her own daughter received comments that linked to sex already as a toddler, how her daughter was considered curvy, how inappropriate it would be to have her in something other than a one-piece swimsuit. The study establishes that adultification is a kind of dehumanization, and that Black girls being adulticide are seen as adults with an adult's responsibility, lose an essential part of their childhood and are robbed of their innocence. I would also argue that that is the same case for girls, regardless of race, who are being sexually exploited, raped, and sold. I myself was a child when my virginity was taken, when I was raped and when I was sold. I have seen with my own eyes through the Swedish legal system how guilt and responsibility have been tried to be shared between victims and perpetrators, as if we were two equal parties who share the same goals, power, and opportunities. In Borås District Court in 2001, with my two male perpetrators in front of me, I heard everything from how I was significantly more mature than most other girls, and how I played as a big role as these men in the thing, big as a role as these men in the things that happened. That these men had committed a crime was mostly formal. The responsibility was just as much mine. If anything was to be said, well, it was that I could have been seen as the thriving force behind what happened. What happened then? Well, one of the men had taken me over from my old pimp, and both men for 6 months bought my body, tried to persuade me to get one of my friends to join a network, which I didn't. I was sold to different men, tied up and raped, marinated in alcohol, and together they caused injuries both physically and mentally through hour-long abuse sessions. I was 15 and they were 45. I'm not a victim because I'm Black. I'm not a victim because I'm a woman. Destructive structures and the majority of violent men make me a victim for that very reason. Sexism and racism are branches of the same tree. In a broader and many times better perspective, one should look up from individual sex powers and see the violence that sexism and racism give rise to as part of the society that must be worked with tirelessly, because they fuel each other and at the same time legitimize each other's actions. In summary, the answer can best be answered by acknowledging you're asking the wrong person. Ask the perpetrators the question, why are you abusing, raping, and beating her, buying her? Was it because she's Black or because she's female? Sweden has had the law, or the sex buyers law that we call it in Sweden. The Nordic model is called internationally, sometimes even called the equality model, since 1999. We also have had wonderful words written about this law, special reports being shown out to the public and to the international area. But the thing is, when we speak about the problem globally, we have to include that every law, whether or not we're talking about Canada or Sweden, needs to be implemented, as Valerie so eloquently said, in all levels. And the thing that we have been working hard with, especially the last 5 years, when I have to say we rid ourselves from the liberal sex positive agenda, claiming that work is work, sex work is work, which was also very much highlighted in the reports that were made. They were made a significant difference between a woman who did it freely, which does not exist, can add, and a woman who was trafficked. We've been able to speak during the last, well, let's say 5 years, especially since Me Too, more openly about how prostitution in Sweden afflicts women and girls, and how we are kept in poverty, and how we are kept being a marginalized group who has no voice, who's often spoken for by sex liberal, lecturers, professors doing studies where we're nothing but tools who, in the end, will see our voices being run over by anonymous voices saying that they love being in sex work. We are working to end that and to be more visible, and to see that the law was written on 2 legs. One was the traditional system, which works better, especially when it has the funds to do so, and also the care of the people who and the prevention of the demand. When I speak to you now about the global aspect of my work, I usually do lectures. I try to go abroad as much as I can, because I love listening to all other survivors and all other people who works with these questions. But we need to manifest a broad, global, almost a new female UN to deal with this, because it's a global issue. that we are trying to work out locally or nationally, and it's not going to work like that. So my hopes and my dreams is that Philia blows up to be this global UN, or if we have another organization, but I love Philia, so I'd love it to be you guys, and where we can support and lobbying against the sex positive sex work regime who are taking over. We have to expose their lies. We have the voices, we have the data. I can't see how they can conquer with anything other than, and this is what sucks living in a patriarchy, the holes in the system that they build for themselves. And that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing governments who say that they see that women are being, brutalized, beaten, raped, and killed, but they still want to maintain that hole so they can stick their dick in it. I'm sorry for being rude, but to stick their dick in it and buy another person without consent. A person that would much rather be studying or working or being in need of treatment because of their own entitled wills, and they do because they can. I'm so in full support of a global campaign. I'm in a global fundraising where we can start put pressure on these states locally, regionally, globally, because this is not a question about that should separate us at all, being left wing or right wing. I am very much left, but this is a question of right and wrong, period. So I'm really thankful to be able to speak here today. I'm looking forward to listening to all the other great speakers as well. And I want to thank you for inviting me. And also, when it comes to the book, I will release it next year. I'm not going to sit there and toot my own horn, but it's an opportunity. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Merle. You are so right that prostitution lies in the intersection of sexism, racism, and classism. This is your analysis is so brilliant, and thank you so much for your brilliant contribution. Now I will introduce our next speaker, Caroline Pugh Roberts. She was born in South Africa and survived sex trafficking in Canada. After exiting and recovering, she has decided to dedicate her life to the abolitionist struggle. She became an expert on human trafficking who works with multiple NGOs, projects, and educational institutions. Caroline traveled the world to deliver her message to a global audience. During this journey, she educated over 20,000 people. Caroline speaks about the harms of pornography as well. Recently, she sent a letter to the PM of Canada, Justin Trudeau, asking him to shut down MindGig, a parent company of the Pornhub. Thank you so much, Caroline. 2 years ago, Caroline started a program. Okay, yeah, you have also started a program for women who have been or are at risk of being trafficked. Since its inception, 19 women have permanently exited, and 8 more women are in the process of rehabilitation. Now, in addition to her activism, Caroline is also incredibly cool. She's a skydiving instructor who held a Canadian record for 7 years, yes, and got a silver medal from the Canadian Nationals. Thank you so much for joining us, Caroline. Let's listen to you.
Thanks, Lube. I don't know how to follow that. I want to start by following up something the previous speaker just said. Why is it that the world has a problem with minors selling sex, but the minute she turns 18, she's choosing it? If she's known nothing else. So I also want to say that sex is not a human right. Food, water, air safety, freedom, and education are human rights. Sex is not a need, it's a want. So in December 2014, here in Canada, Our version of the Nordic model, equality model, was implemented, and I was lucky enough to be able to consult on that. Prior to that, 888 women were charged. After that, only 5. So this is really important because the premise of Bill C-36 is to enable women to exit when they and if they so choose without a criminal record. You can't even be a volunteer if you have a criminal record. They are forced to go back because they cannot get work. So it does not make it more dangerous, which is an argument I'm hearing all the time. After that, the HT, human trafficking charges, presented in 3 out of 10, and those charges were profiting off of somebody. Prior to the implementation of our model, there were 54 homicides. That dropped to 35. So when people say it makes it more dangerous to decriminalize and criminalize the men, it's just not true, and we have the stats to prove it. That's actually on the contrary, right? So 93% of those charged under Bill C-36 were men. And this is why we have to target the men, because it's basic economics. I know I'm singing to the choir. With no demand, there's no need for supply. It's very, very simple. Victims were less likely to have physical injuries with the implementation. In the 5-year period after the implementation of it, only 17 received injuries compared to 29% previously. Women are far more likely to come forward if harmed because they knew they wouldn't be charged. So it is making it safer for them. The pro-legalization, or actually I call them the pro-pimp lobby, is disseminating the information wrong, and it's getting down to the streets where a lot of the women are, and it's incorrect. Right now, our law is being challenged as being unconstitutional by an organization called, a pimp, a brothel called Fantasy World. And I personally I got 180 women on my caseload. I'm working with one woman that was trafficked by them. It's outrageous what they did to her, and they are finding the money to challenge it. So there are 3 coalitions being formed here in Canada. I'm a part of 2 of them. And we are applying for status to intervene in the courts. Now, luckily, I've managed to find all this data, which squashes all their arguments. It doesn't make it more dangerous. If we look at the other countries that have implemented it, we know this too. We also know that when we look at the other countries where it's legal, organized crime has taken over. Well, people tell me, you can't legislate morality. Take morality, put it on the side. If and when you legalize, you're literally opening the doors of your communities and saying, welcome to organized crime. This, to me, is enough proof. So, having said that, I have found that the primary people who advocate for the pro-pimp lobby are men and women, usually university educated, who have never, do not, and will never sell their bodies, advocating for you and your child to sell themselves. Dr. Melissa Farley has done the research. 95% of those in want out. Prostitution is also incredibly racist. People of color are singularly the highest amount of people being trafficked. In Canada, the Indigenous peoples represent 4.8% of our total population, but represent over 50% of the trafficking victims. So, people are saying prostituted women is a viable career option. Let me tell you something, I was in it for 8 years. Even within it, there is a hierarchy. Yes, I'm on the street. That's the worst I can be. The people who are strippers, escorts, well, I don't do that. So even those women know, because they're still trying to make themselves appear better. And I get it, you have to justify it to survive it. I get that. So we've got this challenge happening. And like I said again, luckily I found these stats. I've got documents now, and we can confidently go to court. I had a hard time finding this information, but I managed to. It costs our government in healthcare per victim in Canadian dollars, $802,902 per victim per year to look after them from the damage done to their bodies. And that includes the addiction counseling, that includes the physical, because we're looking at prolapsed anuses, we're looking at collapsed pelvic floors. I'm working with a woman, she's 18, she's permanently on a diaper. This is not a viable career option. So I also have co-run the John School for over 15 years, the Sex Buyers Accountability Program. And I found it to be profound. My number one job there is to humanize us to these men, because we're commodities, and that's what legalization does. I say to them, would you drop your mother, aunt, daughter, or niece off in a dark alley at 3 in the morning and drive away with nary another thought to her? And to a man, they get offended and go, no. And I take a very pregnant pause and I go, well, why'd you do it to her? Dead silence. When I speak in universities, I actually quite like that, because the boys/men in those classes are at the age where they can have the financial means to purchase. And so we've got the empowering arguments. So I turn to the men in the class and I say, how many of you think that prostitution and pornography is empowering? And they raise their hands. Then I say, how many of you would marry her after that? Not a hand raises. And I turn to the women in the class and I say, see, look around, look around. They are not on your side. This is about satisfying their needs. They don't care if they harm you and destroy any potential future that you may have had. So I'm hearing arguments. Prostitution enables women to put food on the table, to buy diapers for their children. I ask the men, so you care? And they go, yeah. And I go, well, why don't you just buy her the diapers? Why'd you make her earn it? I have, in over 15 years, always, without fail, had at least one guy come up to me, often with tears, saying, take me by the hand, which I have a problem with. He didn't ask if he could touch me, and say, I'm sorry, I didn't know. At which point I say, you know, I get that we don't know what we don't know. And I get that when we know better, we do better. But what I don't get is why you didn't know. We women are roughly 50% of this planet, yet we gave birth to 100% of it. Why didn't you know? And this comes back to the education. I tell these men, it's time for you to stand up and be counted. Stand up and be counted. And yes, you're going to get pushback, but it's nothing compared to what we've had since time beginning. Stand up and say no to your peers. Unless and until every one of these men speaks up for us in every scenario that they're in, it might as well be all men, because any form of silence is complicity. People say to me, not all men. I give them this analogy. I'm walking down the street one night, it's pitch dark, there's a man following me, and I'm very, very scared. And then I remember not all men, so all of a sudden I'm not scared. I need to know, literally, not all men. I want to talk about porn just for a moment. We know that pornography is still in prostitution. In Canada, we have Bill C-36, where it's illegal to purchase. Why are these men allowed to purchase porn? I'm struggling with this one, because especially when and we know how so many women are trafficked into pornography. Even when they're dead, these men will still be masturbating to their rape. They're literally watching a crime scene, and it's legal. I'm confused about this. We know that through the campaign for Pornhub, they had to remove 10 million non-consensual videos. I'm on Pornhub, I don't know where, and I've chosen not to look for it, but this is something, when these women, myself included, walk down the street, I don't know how many men have seen me naked. Yeah. Oh, it doesn't go away for us. It doesn't go away. Money doesn't buy consent, it buys compliance. And that's a big difference. I've got so much to say, I'm like tripping over my words. I want to say again that sex is not a human right. And if the purchase of sex is illegal here, why can they purchase porn? Because that is purchasing sex. If their definition of sex is only by physical touch, then that needs to be in the thing, but it's not. So stop Porn needs to be illegal to purchase. It's very, very simple as far as I'm concerned. That's what I've got prepared. I know I probably didn't go 20 minutes, but thank you.
But
Well,
thank you very much. And you are absolutely right. There is absolutely no reason to enforce the sex purchase ban and to allow porn. Actually, fighting porn is so much easier than fighting the traditional sex trade. You know, to shut down the brothel, you should do some field work. To shut down porn websites, you should just push the button. This is absolutely no reason to not extend the Nordic model on the porn and the other kinds of prostitution, porn and the strip clubs and the
webcams,
everything. Yeah,
actually, going to what Valerie said, I've seen every conceivable sex act, including fisting, in the strip bars. They are brothels. It's very simple. She's very right. And they do not get paid to work in strip bars. When you walk in there, you pay them the privilege for working. It's astonishing, absolutely astonishing how degraded and the level of depravity that's involved in the selling of human beings, especially females.
This is so true. And thank you very much, Caroline, for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker now is Huschke from Germany. Oh, we have yet another cat lover here. So what was the criterion to be included in this webinar, I wonder? Okay, Huschke entered the world of prostitution as a traumatized 17-year-old girl. Her first pimp was a policeman. She was trapped in prostitution for many years and survived rape, drug and alcohol abuse, and suicide attempts. After being finally able to exit prostitution, she attended university and completed her master's degree. These days, she is working on her PhD. And this is amazing because this world needs more systematic knowledge created by survivors. This is what we are doing today. Huschke is also an activist for the Nordic model. She has founded Network Ella, an organization for abolitionist sex trade survivors in Germany. Huschke is a brave and fresh abolitionist voice, one of the first who revealed to the world the atrocities of the legalized sex industry in Germany. I was privileged to hear some of her speeches in live, and they were so powerful. I really envy you that you are going to listen to her today. Thank you so much for coming here to share your wisdom and your knowledge, Huschke.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I have to apologize for several blackouts and stuff. I got vaccinated and I still have a little fever. So if I begin to stutter or something, please be kind. I would like to talk about the consequences of legalization as we see it in Germany. I guess you know that in Germany we have one of the most liberal prostitution laws in the world. So we can see where that goes and where that ends. At first, I would like to reveal some numbers. So in Germany, it's said that we have 400,000 women in prostitution, but that's not for sure because we don't even know the number of women in prostitution in Germany. It's from 40,000 to 500,000, we don't know. What we do know is that in Germany, 1 million Johns visit a brothel every day. 1 million Johns every day. And that since full legalization law in 2002, over 100 women in prostitution were murdered. So let's talk about the consequences. First, I would like to say why I think prostitution is violence. It doesn't matter in which conditions prostitution takes place, there's something wrong with it. Because the woman in prostitution says is a yes to the money and not to the sex. The sex is still unwanted. And unwanted sex is sexual assault or rape always. And money doesn't change that. And it's a strange male behavior to sleep with a woman without being able to say whether the woman actually wants that or not. The punter or the John cannot tell afterwards if the sex was forced or not. He goes away and he can't tell whether he just raped or not. And that is clearly sexual problematic behavior. So what are the consequences of acceptance and legalization as we see it in Germany? We had a law in 2002 that fully legalized prostitution. And what we see, what happens is at first, the consequences for the woman in prostitution, there are almost no exit programs anymore. It's treated like a job. It's a job like any other. And women don't get help anymore. It's private or church organizations who do the help. But the help does not come from the state. So we see legalization makes prostitution a trap for women. 9 out of 10 women want out, and they cannot. They receive no help. The second thing we see is that legalizing prostitution deproblematizes sex buying and covers up the sexual abuse that's happening. It's treated as a job. The brothel owners here are called landlords. Pimps are called businessmen, and the Johns are normal clients. That doesn't take away the hurt and the trauma that prostituted women experience, and it does not help against stigma. Prostituted women here are still very much stigmatized. It's the John who don't need to be ashamed anymore, since it's said they are just buying a normal service. Legalization does not help against the war stigma. It just helps Johns to not face the consequences of what they do. Johns became very much enabled because of the legalization law. They feel entitled, and if they are not content with the performance or the service, they will emphasize their demand. I had so many clients who ignored when I was crying or when I was in pain, and they demanded I stop looking disgusted or stop crying because paid is paid. Since it's legal, what they do, they feel they have a right to sex because they paid for it. And if they don't like the performance, they sometimes even take women to court. We had a young girl here. She was raped at 17, and then she was in prostitution. And she had a John who was unable to orgasm, and he took her to court over it, and she had to pay 500 euros. So this is what happens when you legalize prostitution. Also, it brutalizes the clients. The sex practices become more and more violent, sadistic, because it's just a service and it's okay to do it. They don't feel they do this to a human being anymore. And yeah, that leads to an escalation of violence. We have so many beatings and rapes in prostitution. The women don't even go to the police. And we have many, many murders. It's over 100 murders since 2002. So in 20 years, 100 murders. The next thing is that legalization definitely creates more Johns. Laws have a normative effect, and if it's okay to do it, more people will do it. In Germany, many men do it. As I told you, every day 1 million men go to a brothel in Germany. Every day 1 million men. And when you have more clients, more money gets into the sex industry system. That means more brothel owners open brothels, and that means more women are needed. And this is where the human traffickers join the game. There will never be enough women who do this voluntarily. The biggest part will always be forced. And the society that accepts and legalizes prostitution accepts human trafficking and forced prostitution. You can't have one thing without the other. So legalization leads to more clients, leads to more brothels, leads to more human trafficking and forced prostitution, because pimps and traffickers also want to make money and satisfy the demand of the Johns for young women. The police now has no way to enter brothels anymore, since they are normal businesses. They need an initial suspicion that a woman is forced or a minor. But how can you get a suspicion when you're not allowed to check the brothel rooms and the people in the brothel in the first place? So in legal brothels in Germany, there are many forced women and trafficked women, and this goes completely under the radar. It's the legal brothels and the legal street prostitution where this happens. So legal prostitution is not the good prostitution on the one side, and it's not the bad illegal prostitution on the other side. It's legal prostitution where human trafficking and forced prostitution takes place too. And this is a spiral down as we see it in Germany. You have more clients, that means more brothels, that means more trafficked women, more men without compassion, more Johns, more brothels, and so on. It's like a section where more and more women and girls become drawn into the sex industry. Germany has become a sex tourism destination, and we are called a brothel of Europe, and the title is very well earned. Of course, in Germany, human trafficking and forced prostitution is forbidden, but that doesn't change a thing, because the pimps and the traffickers, they use the legal infrastructure to run their businesses. It's legal brothels, it's legal street prostitution where this happens, and it's mostly unchecked. So what happens when you have more Johns in a society? More clients mean more men with problematic sexual behavior. So when you have a society where you have very many Johns, like we have, you have many men who show sexual problematic behavior. And we see that this affects non-prostituted women too, because of course, when a man learned that under certain circumstances, it's okay to have sex with a woman who doesn't really want to and doesn't really consent to this, this is a lesson that doesn't stay behind closed brothel doors. It's a behavior that affects all women. All women in the society have to deal with Johns, if they know that or not. And there are studies which prove there are more rapes in society where prostitution is legalized. A society that accepts prostitution is a society that accepts violence against women. And that fact clearly does not make a society more woman-friendly, and it does not help when it comes to gender equality. So there's a complete blunting when it comes to prostitution in Germany. There are pimps in talk shows laughing about the fact that the police think to let prostituted women work for 16 hours a day is slavery. Pimps sit in German talk shows and laugh about it in public. And there are soccer clubs who distribute brothel coupons to their male audience. There are school books with tasks like build the perfect brothel, a brothel for everyone, an inclusive brothel. Yeah, we see these effects, and they are clearly a problem. And there's a last point I want to talk about, and that is that to accept prostitution and sex buying deepens every single way of discrimination a society has. I mean, sexism, classism, racism, anti-Semitism, and so on, because it allows the discrimination to become fetishized and acted out and connected with sexual degradation through prostitution. For example, ethnicity is fetishized in prostitution, and to allow prostitution makes a country more racist, because the sex buyers who, for example, buy Asian women like an object won't see other non-prostituted Asian women like humans after that anymore. And of course, it's colonialism when we as a country have, I mean, 19% of all women in German prostitution come from really poor European states like Romania, Bulgaria, and so on. And they are so young and so desperate and so poor, and they are here just to suck the dicks of our German men. And this is clearly, we have a class of women who are nothing but sexual slaves for German men, and this is so racist, and so it's like Germany is still a colonialist state or something, and the society doesn't even realize that, and this is truly shocking. We even have events like Frankfurter Bahnhofsviertelnacht. This is in Frankfurt, in the red light district, there's a party once a year, and you can go through the brothels like, you're going through a zoo or something. And everybody can visit the brothels that day, and they go through the brothels and see the half-naked, very young Bulgarian and Romanian women who don't even know what happens, who don't speak no German, and so on, and they are being looked at like, this is just so racist and degrading and inhumane, and I have no words for this, but yeah, prostitution does make a society more racist. And there are so many brothels who work like that, brothels with racial apartheid, where you go to the first floor and there are the Romanian women, you go to the second floor, there are African women, you go to the third floor, there are Asian women, and so on. And it reinforces racism, because those women, they are reduced to racial stereotypes. Asians are submissive, African women are promiscuous and wild, and so on. This is what the Johns buy. They buy a racist stereotype. And when you have many Johns in a society, of course, you have more racism in a society. So men buy women reduced to racial stereotypes, and combined with the sexual degradation that prostitution is, this amplifies racism and allows racism to be acted out. Another truly shocking example is that we have a very well-known Luxus escort in Germany, and she offers some role play for German Johns, where she plays the Jewish girl, and I have no idea what kind of role plays she has with her German Johns. I don't want to imagine, but this is, wouldn't it be in prostitution, everybody would look at this and would say, wow, this is completely wrong, and this is anti-Semitism, and this is racist and all, but since it's in prostitution, it seems to be okay. And we see also that Johns use very racist and sexist slurs against women, and they try to offer refugee women from Syria and so on money for sex too. So they go and offer money to them, and they are happy that they are here. I heard some Johns even say it's good that it's war in Syria. That means there come young, desperate women, and we can have them for sex. So this is welcome to John's world. So what I want to say is to accept men to buy sex and therefore to buy women is making society more violent in every way you can think of. There's more violence against women and girls in prostitution. There's more human trafficking and more forced prostitution. There are more brutal clients, more murders, more rapes on prostituted and non-prostituted women, more woman hating and more racism. So prostitution affects the society as a whole, and this is why we need to abolish it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Huschke. You contribute so much knowledge and understanding of the legalized sex industry and its consequences for the society in general. I think that many people learn from you the truth about the legalized sex industry, because there is still the myth, because Germany is a progressive country, it is a Western country, they legalize prostitution, so it must be good. But nobody can insist that legalized sex trade is good after listening to your speech, to your presentation. So thank you so much. And I will introduce our last speaker for today. Thank you for coming to us, Alice Johnson. Alice Johnson from Michigan in the US. She is a survivor of child abduction, human trafficking, and sexual exploitation. She was trapped in the sex trade for 17 years. After years of recovery and activism, she collected a wealth of knowledge based on hard-won experience. Alice Johnson is a human trafficking advocate at Neighborhood Legal Services in Michigan that offer free legal assistance and community resources for housing and trauma support. She is an author and creator of the project Out of the Darkness, Who I Am Now, a Survivor's Story. She performs and plans survivor-led workshops and mentorship programs. Another project where Alice is involved is the Strive to Thrive, a jail diversion program in Detroit. This is a community service outreach to the exploited and trafficked persons. This program offers specialized services through the court, such as case management, survivor support groups, and mentoring. Alice is an expert speaker on human trafficking and sexual exploitation topics. As a human rights activist, she builds better understanding and new perspectives through her life experience, strength, and hope. Thank you so much for joining us, Alice.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I want to start by, talking about some of my experience, in America. And as a young girl, I was being trafficked in America and trafficked all over America, not just in one city, not just in one state, but state to state to state. And when I was a minor, I was in places that were disguised as massage parlors, brothels, strip clubs, and men would come in and buy me with credit cards. And I was not allowed to go outside, to go shopping, to have relationships. I wasn't even allowed to speak to, certain women. I wasn't allowed to go to school. My human rights were taken. My basic rights were taken. And I had no one to advocate for me. In America, the fact that you are a runaway or that you are abandoned, you become, no longer important. And selling yourself is a means to live. And I just think it's very inhumane. And it is also a It's also about class, you know, because when you're looking at one person and you're saying, okay, well, this person should have to sell themselves to eat, but this other person doesn't have to sell themselves to eat. You know, it's unjust. It's unjust to even have that thought process. And over those years, I experienced many women who died, many women who were killed by the hands of, some people call them plunters, some people call them tricks, you know, some people call them Johns, some people call them buyers, right? And so in America, they actually protect the buyer and ostracize the girl who is in need of help. Well, some people would say, well, that's a job. I don't know any job where you go to work and you could come home dead. I don't know any job where you go to work and you can come home with AIDS. I don't know any job where you can work without a social security card or a birth certificate or ID or a bank account or, you know, a place to live, even a car. The most of the girls that I encounter, and myself included, and encounter to this day, don't have these things. So to say that they're working, it's defeatist. How in America, right? You're supposed to be able to have the pursuit to happiness. Pursuit to happiness is, you know, me working, me having a job, and me building a life for myself. Women in America who are being exploited and trafficked are not seen as even human beings. We're classified as prostitutes, and in the systems, we're seen as derelicts. We're not even seen as a human being. We don't get the same treatment as, you know, someone who is not exploited. And in America, there is no recovery for her. There's no system or no type of organizations and things, not enough. They're just now starting to catch on in some states. And but there's no systems designed to help them. The only systems are out there is once you're a prostitute, that's it. You die there. And one of the reasons why I became a martyr and why I wrote my book and why I became public, it was very challenging for me because I had been in recovery and I had changed my life and I was working with women. And, you know, my family was like, why would you write this book? Why would you tell people this? Why would you put yourself out there? If you never told anybody, no one would know. But I know. And somebody else is taking my place. The fact that I was 12 years old, 2 weeks, I had just turned 12 years old. 2 weeks before my 12th birthday, I was initiated into a life of prostitution. 25 cars lined up around the corner when they set me on the street. Black men, white men, Mexican, all races. I knew my life was over, but I didn't know what was about to happen. I didn't know the extent of how it was over, how my soul would be ripped from me, my values, my morals, everything that I had ever stood on and been taught. And it baffles me that in America, they think that just because you might be a runaway or abandoned or in poverty, that you don't have hopes, that you don't have dreams, that you want to grow up and be a prostitute. Oh yeah, that's what I want to do. No. You know, and I remember being locked up in juveniles and jails and institutions across the country where I was ostracized from other children because I was seen as a prostitute. I was at, you know, at my workplace just not recently, and one of my supervisors asked me about a case that I got back in '87. And I had to remind him, first of all, in '87, I was 17 years old. You know, even today, people will bring up my past. Even after 17 years of recovery, when I walk in a room or people that know me and know my story, I have to walk down being a prostitute. building relationships. All these things are so hard and so challenging. And then you got a system that says, well, she deserved it. That's what she wanted to do. That's what she signed up for. In America, women die in trap houses. They have these places where, they sell drugs and they're pretty much run down and abandoned, maybe don't have no water, maybe don't have no heat. Women live in these places and men come and buy them. And how is that a service to a human being? How is it a service to a human being if I'm standing on a block, right, on a street, and it's 30 degrees outside and I've been out there 3 hours and I have nowhere to go, and I'm freezing. I have no ID, no social security card, no birth certificate. I have no job skills. I don't even have a place to lay my head or to get warm. And a man pulls up beside you and he rolls down the window and the heat hits you. You're going to get in the car. I'm not getting in the car to have sex. I'm getting in the car because I don't want to die. And it's not okay for someone to rape me because I want to live. It's not okay for someone to rape me because I have no means of survival. And that's what is happening. What is happening is men are raping women. And we're justifying it. We're saying, oh, it's okay because she's deprived and she has to eat. Why is it acceptable anywhere on the planet that I should have to sell my body to eat? This should not be a thing. It is immoral. It is inhuman. It is unjust. It is against God. So how do we, as civilized people, say that this is okay? I have met hundreds of women in my city, just in my city alone. In the past 5 years, I've probably encountered 1,000 women who've been trafficked, who've been exploited. And in America, it is so normal that the girls don't even know that that's what's going on. They don't even realize that. They don't even know what it is. You say, have you been trafficked? Have you been exploited? And they don't know what you're talking about. They absolutely do not understand. And so that's why I created the workshops, so that I could go and have these sit downs with people that are in shelters and group homes and juveniles and in prisons, so I could educate them about what's happening so they can get the help, so that they can ask for help. And then you got they in America, they have the audacity to have something that is against it, to have a whole system that is against them getting help. And it just baffles me. I don't even understand it. And they try to pin. They have like a smoke screen. Well, there are some that this is their right and they can do this, and you know what I mean. And then they have the other side, and they put us on the other side. So you have the prostituted, quote unquote, right? And then you have the trafficked and the exploited. That's an illusion. They're all the same. They're all the same person. And the illusion is what they don't understand is that if you look at it through a recovery lens, you have those who are still in and those who are trying to get out. That's what it is. Stop with the smoke screen. There's no two sides. We need to figure out ways and means for them to exit. We need to have enough grace to create a space of a way out. Look at, how do we entrap people? We entrap them by not giving them the opportunity to grow. They are someone's daughter. They are someone's sister, someone's mother, someone's brother. In the LGBT community in America, it is almost like a rite to passage. If you're a runaway or you're homeless or you're deprived or your family kicks you out, you can't get a job. Oh, well, we'll just put you on Backpage. We'll just, you know, you can do these escorts. Like, and it's so natural that it is baffling because we die. We die thinking that we were brought to the world to be someone's sex object. There were many, many years in my life, and that helped. The one of the things that got me through it was because I told myself that it had to be me. Because if it was someone else, they would have died. That I had to do it. And I told myself that I was born to be a prostitute. And no one should have to tell themselves that in order to be okay. And I cry out because all the women in the country right now and in the world right now who are telling themselves, well, I have to do this. This is how I eat. This is who I am. This is what God wanted for me. Do you see what we're telling them? We're telling them that this is what God had for you. And when you do that, I want you to put yourself in their shoes. Put yourself in their shoes and tell yourself, how would you survive thinking that God wanted you to be a prostitute and that is acceptable? That's just the way it is for you. It should not be acceptable. I will not accept it. That's why I fight so hard to help these women, because I know there was many, many years I thought I had nothing to give to the world, that I was just a derelict and, you know, I was just a whore. But over the last 17 years, I have proven, all these survivors on the panel have proven that we are so much more. We are so much more. And we can give so much to the world if you just give us a space. Give us a space to grow. Give us a space to be able to live a normal life. And how do we do that? It's cities and states and countries don't want to do the work. Stop being lazy. Yes, it's going to take brainstorming. Yes, it's going to take people coming together, getting resources. Yes, it is. It's going to be work helping these women and these men that are trapped in these lifestyles. But we can do it. It's being done in little pockets and places and survivors that are, oh my God, my phone died.
Yeah, Alice's phone died or something. She ran out of her battery. I just so sad that I cannot express my appreciation for Alice's speech. It was amazing. It was moving. Thank you so much, Alice.